Good evening. So today's topic is prices and inflation, the fifth chapter, successful tightrope walking. Okay, so again see here, positive. Yesterday I was talking about positivity. Okay, so here also there is some positivity that is clearly visible. Okay, so here it is clearly visible, is talking about successful tightrope walking. Now let's see. So first of all, the first question is, in the recent past, why there was a challenge of inflation? So that we have to understand. Okay, so what is the main reason for uncertainty, especially with respect to inflation? So economic survey, if we see this particular topic basically, it talks about why inflation has increased. It makes a comparison between global scenario and Indian scenario. It also makes a comparison between the advanced economies and the emerging developing economies. Advanced economies, what is the inflation situation? And developing economies, what is the inflation situation? What is the reason? Okay, and this particular chapter also talks about WPI inflation. WPI, wholesale price. We'll see. We'll talk about wholesale price index. Okay, WPI core. Okay, and it also talks about food related aspects, etc. It makes a comparison between WPI and CPI. Okay, so economic survey basically helps us to exactly know why there was a widening gap between WPI, CPI, or why WPI and CPI were converging. Okay, and subsequently it goes on talking about something like the urban rural inflation. How was inflation in urban areas? How is inflation in the rural areas? If at all there is a difference in rural and urban inflation, what are the main reasons for this difference? Okay, so that is also one more area which economic survey basically stresses. So there can be some prelims questions talking about rural inflation is more than urban inflation, etc. Okay, so that is very important as far as exam is concerned. And then it clearly talks about the reasons why CPI has increased or decreased, reasons why WPI has increased or decreased. So all these things are clearly discussed in the economic survey. And the economic survey also talks about specifically two sectors. One is the pharmaceutical sector and the housing, and the impact of inflation on these sectors like housing and pharma. Why? Because there is importance for medicine, obviously, and housing becoming costly, etc. Rents and all have to be controlled, and these kind of things here, property rates. So these two areas are specifically focused. And then again, the economic survey also goes down to compare how was inflation in 1970s and how is inflation today, and what is the comparison between the inflation in 1970s and today. Is there any difference between inflation in the 1970s and inflation today? What, if at all there is a difference? There is a difference, obviously. And what is the difference? Okay. Is this clear? Okay, so this is one more important area which, and then another important aspect the survey talks about is about the inflationary expectations. The inflationary expectations. Expectations means if you are expecting that the inflation is going to increase, there will be some changes in the economy, obviously. Okay, and if people's belief is that the inflation is going to be controlled in the long-term period, then the indicators keep changing. So expectations drive prices. How expectations drive prices. And then it talks about the monetary tools. Yesterday we have discussed, no, in the monetary policy class, yesterday we have discussed 250 basis points repo rate has been increased. Now, is it a good thing to do? Okay, will it have a soft landing or a hard landing? That means, will it put India into trouble? Will it push India into recession, or will it not push India into recession? Okay, so because you have tightened the interest rates. If you have tightened the interest rates, do you think India will fall into recession, or is it that India will have a soft landing? Are you able to get this? So this is the structure of the topic. Is it clear? Okay, so this is the overview. Like these are the areas basically. If you see, these are the areas that are there, that is discussed, and this is important topic for prelims basically. Now let's start. So here if you see, the basic understanding here, one important aspect what we should understand is, the biggest challenge was the lockdown period. There was lockdown across because of COVID pandemic, there was lockdown. And one important challenge during lockdown, government was also focused on fiscal stimulus on one side, and RBI was also focused on monetary stimulus. Because you have to, obviously government has to give food, okay, or access to healthcare, etc. Everything should be there, affordable, etc. So during that point of time, we observed that there was an expansionary monetary policy on one side as well as an expansionary fiscal policy on the other side. This is a clear understanding, okay, so that the economy will not fall. But at the same time, one more understanding during that point of time is, there was huge uncertainty in the market, in people's minds also. First wave, lockdown, then second wave, we were struggling during the second wave. Okay, so huge uncertainty means people were not interested in spending. So there is injection of money into the economy, but they were not spending money because of uncertainties existing in the world. Especially this is valid for the world and more valid for India. So because of this uncertainty, people did not spend money, and therefore there was a low pent-up demand. There was a low pent-up demand. So when I use the word pent-up demand, the demand has dropped. Okay, so we were expecting that after a drop, if the demand is going to, after a slump, the demand is going to recover. We use the word called as pent-up demand. Okay, so it was stagnant. So it was not recovering. Okay, but money was pumped into the economy, but it was not recovering. So this was the situation. Now afterwards, lockdown was removed, restrictions were reduced, and slowly people also felt a little confident. Government also was talking about vaccinations. Okay, and government also saying Omicron is okay, don't worry, it will do nothing. Okay, so all this is basically confidence boosters. So this uncertainty has been reduced in the market as well as in the minds of the public. So because of that, they started, now after the removal of restrictions, you've observed that the pent-up demand slowly started increasing. The pent-up demand slowly started increasing. That means people now started buying products, consuming. They are ready out with injecting money. They are ready to buy. Now this had some inflationary effect, obviously. Are you able to get this money that was given? Now you started spending, and when you start spending, obviously, because of this sudden increase in the pent-up demand, there is inflation in the economy. Are you able to get this? Now, along with this increase in the pent-up demand, which has basically increased the overall demand, on one side, what is observation? The demand was increasing at a faster pace, but the supply was not matching the demand. Demand was increasing because they had cash, money in hand, because of the stimulus policies followed. So they were spending money to buy products, and because of that, there was too much of demand, but supply was not matching. The supply will take some more time. The production did not increase in line with the demand, and this has created problems of inflation. Now, along with this, another important challenge that came up is the war. Are you able to get this? So war has started adding up to the inflation because of supply constraints. Oil started becoming costly. There are issues related to logistics. Food prices started becoming costly. So all these supply chain related issues, supply constraints started increasing because of war. And zero COVID policy followed by China. Okay, and this is again, it has boosted inflation to a higher extent. Along with this, this has added to the inflation. Are you able to get this? Okay, so along with this, these supply constraints plus this demand constraint has led to something like inflation. This is the first understanding. I hope you have understood. Okay, so that is the reason now this started becoming the main challenge, not only for the RBI, not just India. This is not just for India. It is across the globe. You observe that the inflation rates were increasing. Even in the developed world, we observe for the first time that the inflation rates have become so high. So this is, if this is clear, then everything will be clear. Have you understood this? Everybody? Yes? Now, here if we observe, now this is a comparison of inflation rate in advanced economies and the emerging markets. Now this, if you observe here, this is the basically the emerging developing economies. Emerging developing economies, and this is advanced economies. Now, advanced economies inflation rate at as high as on an average 7.2. This rate is the highest after 1980s. Now, you could find such rates only in 1980s. Such high rates were not there. Economic survey clearly talks about it. It says this is 9.9. This is for the emerging developing economies. And most important aspect is this aspect of the developed world, that is advanced economies, where the inflation rate is very high. Is that clear? Okay. Now here one more understanding here. If we observe US on an average was growing at 9.1, UK around 9.2%. Okay, inflation rates. Okay, so I said India's inflation was quite tolerable. Remember this? Because India, yesterday's class I mentioned, I said India's inflation rates of 7.8. So 7.8, 2020 to 23. 2021 to 23 it has reduced, but if I say 7.8 on the upper side also, it was tolerable. It was hardly 1.8 above our tolerable limit of 6%. So compared to the advanced economies, India was definitely okay, even with respect to this factor called as inflation. This is one understanding there. And some countries like Turkey and all, inflation rate went up to almost like 80%. Economic survey says 80, it is like, and then it reduced to 64%. Okay, it has given these values to clearly show, obviously, when we compare the developing economies, and specifically if I have to talk about India, India is okay and pretty decent because it was well in the controllable limit when it comes to inflation. Is this clear, everybody? Yes. Actually, in mains, we can put up some graphs. Okay, so, but our focus primarily now is on the prelim. Okay, so probably these graphs, if there are questions on inflation targeting, monetary policy, and definitely we can show some indicators in our graph, growth, inflation, etc. So probably two elements can be shown. So that I will talk at the end of the class. Okay. So here, economic survey talks about this. Rise in the prices hurt the common man. Inflation is dangerous because it will reduce the purchasing power of the common man, basically. And that is the biggest concern for the policy makers. And mainly the supply side disruptions, as we have talked about. So this supply side disruptions, which I was talking about in this area, supply side disruptions, which I was mentioning here. Okay, so this supply side disruptions pushed inflations beyond RBI's upper tolerance. So we know that 4 plus or minus 2. Okay, so beyond RBI's upper tolerance, and this is mainly one aspect is here you observe that the supply constraints. Here he talks about supply chain disruptions mainly with respect to some essential goods. Okay, food, medicines, raw materials, clothes and footwear. We'll see the data also slowly. Okay, so that means this supply chain constraints, if I see, have made these goods costly. This is the meaning. These supply chain constraints which are driving inflation has made these goods costly. And Russia-Ukraine crisis subsequently added on. Okay, crude oil, fertilizers, wheat, sunflower oil. Okay, so crude oil, fertilizers, wheat. So this is also one along with this, then the rain-fed agriculture getting affected, etc. These were all the reasons for driving inflation. That means agriculture played an important role in terms of driving inflation. That is basically here, one observation is obviously food. That we'll see the data. Data, if we see, we'll understand it better. Is this clear? Clear till here? Yes. Okay, now here economic survey talks about this. India's inflation rate peaked in April to 7.8 before moderating to 5.7 in December. Okay, so this is completely, this is showing that, tightrope walking, we are okay now. Okay, by December 22. And the reasons given are global economic slowdown. So this has reduced the demand with respect to certain aspects. Okay, and then monsoon was okay. And RBI's monetary policy. RBI's monetary policy. These were responsible for bringing down the inflation. This is the understanding. These were responsible for bringing down the inflation. Very simple, nothing difficult here. Is this clear? Yes. Now, when we talk about the inflation part, we observe that the WPI inflation was higher than the CPI inflation. The WPI inflation was higher than the CPI inflation. But over a period of time, we observe that the WPI and the CPI inflation converge. This is what is the observation. Now, first of all, to understand why it was high, okay, and to understand why it started going low over a period of time, we should first understand what are the constituents of the WPI basket. So once we know the constituents of the WPI basket, then we will see which aspect started reducing and because of which aspect before last year, WPI inflation was on a higher scale. Are you able to get this? So there can be some prelims related question that can be asked even with respect to these areas. Okay. Now here, make an observation. So in this basket of WPI, I have put some three areas. You can see here, one is the primary articles, then fuel and power, then we have put manufacturing products. Manufacturing products. Okay. Is it visible? Okay. So manufacturing products. Now, if you observe the weightages here, manufacturing, there is a weightage of 64.2. Manufacturing, the weightage is how much? 64.2. Fuel and power, it is 13.2. And primary articles, 22.6. 22.6. More observation, what we have to do is, now, how do we measure WPI inflation based on the concept of linking it to the base year? Okay, we link it to the base here. So when I use the word inflation, inflation is about increase in prices. Okay, when I'm taking a group or a basket of commodities. A group or a basket of commodities. It's not that one or two commodity prices are increasing. You can't say inflation is increasing. Okay, so it is a group or a basket of commodities. Okay, and which you are purchasing from the wholesale market. Which you are purchasing from the wholesale market. That is the reason you are indicating it as what? Wholesale price index. Okay. Then always remember one more aspect here. Whenever global situation gets affected, that means whenever raw materials, etc., iron, steel become costly, the impact will first be there on the WPI, that is on the wholesale markets, and then subsequently over a period of time, it will get transferred to the CPI or the consumer price index. This is one more understanding. That means if the oil prices are increasing and if the industries may be using oil as a raw material, iron is becoming costly, steel is becoming costly, the raw materials are becoming costly. Okay, that means it will first have a higher impact obviously on the WPI, and economic survey says with a lagged effect. Lagged effect means after some point of time, some period, the impact will again come back on the CPI. That means you have WPI increasing and then the impact will slowly get transferred to CPI. This is what is called as the lagged effect of WPI getting transferred to CPI. That means first WPI is on a higher level, means after some time you'll definitely see that the CPI is also going to increase. Because what the final customer has to pay will also increase over a period of time. Are you able to get this? Okay. Now here, when I talk about primary articles, so in these primary articles, one is we have food. Food is, the weightage of food that is given is around 15.3%. Basically agriculture commodities. We can talk about onions, whatever it is agriculture commodities. And then here we have others is somewhere around 7.3, something like the minerals, etc. Minerals, etc. around 7.3%. Both put together, it is around 22.6. And then fuel and power 13.2. Here we observe that LPG, etc. is 0.6. Petrol and diesel is around 4.7. And others is around 7.9. Are you able to get this? Okay. And then when I talk about manufactured products, in the manufactured products also there will be food component. Okay. So we can put processed food related food items here. You can put the raw food. Here you are putting processed foods. So processed food, that means in the manufacturing products, there is a food component here also. Okay. 9.1%. 9.1%. Okay. So this is basically, this is also food component in the manufactured products. And then the rest, here 55.1, 55.1. This 55.1 is other than the food, other than the food. There are other manufacturing items. There can be some cars, automobiles, whatever it is. So all this is around 55%. Are you able to get this? Okay. But overall manufacturing product component is more. Okay. Now the question comes up. If there is some Ukraine crisis, oil is becoming costly, food is becoming costly. Okay. So which area will get affected faster? This is one aspect which we should understand. No, suppose there is war, supply constraints, etc. Then oil becomes costly, fuel will become costly, and food also will become costly, isn't it? So that is one understanding here. If you see here, when I talk about WPI food, it is about this 15.3% which is there in the primary articles, plus you also have another 9.1%. That means WPI food is how much? 24.4. Now this 24.4% will be the most volatile aspect, most volatile. That means supply chain disruptions will create maximum problem with respect to this aspect. This is volatile. Food is volatile, no doubt about it. Are you able to get this? Okay. Is this clear? Now when I talk about core, you should be knowing about headline and core inflation. Okay. So core inflation, generally they use the word, it is demand driven. Okay. And core inflation is more stable. And even RBI says, or even the government talks about it, if the core inflation is stable, the country need not worry much. Why? Because it is a stable inflation. These things keep changing because of some disruptions, rupee value fall, you're importing oil becomes costly, some challenge outside. Okay, so these areas keep changing at a faster pace, but core inflation doesn't change at a faster pace. So when I talk about core here, in this, I've removed the food, I've removed the fuel which changes, and I've also removed this other mineral component, etc. So here, mainly, when I use the word core inflation, it is around 55.1. So this core inflation will be more stable in consideration to the headline. Core inflation, if it is stable, obviously you need not worry much. This is what is the logic of the government. Is this clear? Understood? No. So now, the same thing, this division which we have seen here, 22.6, 13.2, 64.2, no confusion. The same thing here you will find. Okay, now here you can see here primary articles. Okay, so the weightage is 22.6. Okay, and here if you see, there is, if you make a comparison here, okay, especially the food articles, etc. Food articles, there is an increase in inflation. And this increase in inflation is basically because of shortages, etc. Food shortages, etc. Clearly visible. And one of the important observation is cereals. These cereals, if you observe, 1.6 to 10.7%. Is that clear? So this is a jump which you can observe here. Okay. Vegetables, okay, vegetables you can observe here from 0.4 to 13.2. Okay, this is again a dangerous number. Okay, and make an observation here, fuel and power. Fuel and power. There is an increase with respect to fuel and power. Okay, but the increase is not so high. The increase is not so high. This is our observation. The increase is not so high when it comes to fuel and power. And one more important observation is base effect also plays a role with respect to comparisons. Base effect. Okay, so you know what is a base effect? It is basically a comparison effect. Comparison effect. You're comparing with that year where, you know, the growth is less, let's say. Okay, then automatically, because of base effect also, the prices seem to be higher. Because of the base effect also, the prices seem to be higher. Are you able to get this? Okay, last time 1.6, now you're making a comparison when the growth was 1.6. And therefore, it seems to look at a rate of how much? 10.7. So, that means this increase can also be because of base effect. So, there can be a question already UPSC has asked, what is a base effect? I think it is clear. Okay. Now, during COVID pandemic, obviously, there would have been some issues with respect to demand, etc. Demand for products, that is especially fuel, etc. That point of time, it would have reduced. Why? Because of lack of demand. But when again the market started opening up and then demand for fuel started increasing, then there would have been inflationary effect because of lockdowns and restrictions being removed. And along with that, supply constraints, etc. Again, fuel prices, there was a jump with respect to the fuel prices. That is one more understanding here. Now, here, if we try to make an observation, okay, see here, manufactured products, the weightage here it is given, 64.2. Okay, so manufactured products, there is a reduction. There is a reduction with respect to manufactured products, 11.1 to 7.1. Okay, and food products, there is a reduction here because government has also taken some measures with respect to reducing some import duties, coming up with stock limits with respect to some items. Okay, so government has come up with reduction of import duties. Okay, restriction on exports. Government came up with some restrictions on exports. Okay, restriction on exports. And government also has mentioned something like stock limits for certain commodities to prevent hoarding, etc. Stock limits, you can't hold beyond a particular limit. Okay, so all these measures taken by the government have reduced the food prices to some extent over a period of time. Are you able to get this? Okay. Now, once this table is clear, here if you see food inflation, food articles plus food products, 24.4. That understanding we should have. Core inflation, as we have discussed, manufacturing products minus the food products. Here, if you observe, core inflation is manufactured products minus the food products. Here, he has put it how much? 55.1, as we have seen in the first box. Is this clear? Okay. Headline inflation overall, I am taking 100% headline inflation. You observe that headline inflation slowly started reducing from 13 to 11.5. Is that clear, everybody? Is the speed okay? Yes. So this is important. This box is important. Okay. Okay. Now here, WPI based inflation peaked to almost like 16.6% in May. Okay, and given the supply chain disruptions and Ukraine-Russia conflict, this is one, oil, food, everything started becoming costly. That time it has peaked. Okay, and prices of items with maximum exposure to international pricing. Okay, so these started increasing. For example, petroleum products, basic metals, chemicals, and edible oils. These were responsible for increase in WPI inflation. Now, this is a valid point. Okay, so something which is related to import, all that is related to import. So this is basically more of an import-driven inflation. More of an import-driven inflation. That is, this import was spiking the prices up. Okay, so all these, if you observe. So this is basically import-driven. So regulatory actions reduce the WPI from its peak in May to 5% by the year end. Now this is because of the measures taken by the government, whether it is with respect to food items, etc. So these are the measures taken by the government. Now here he talks about how the WPI inflation can have an impact on India. So WPI inflation is imported inflation. Okay, this you will remember. And RBI study indicates that every 1% rise in inflation globally would lead to 1.63 increase in inflation in India. This is purely about WPI because this is about the imported inflation. Because this is about the imported inflation. Is this clear? Okay. And in the current financial year, global prices of edible oils, rubber, cotton, crude oil have decreased. And this is the reason why the WPI index also has smoothened a little, has fallen a little. I think it is clear, everybody? Yes. So these are some of the measures that were taken to contain inflation on input prices. So what did government do? This is from the government side. This is very useful, especially in the mains. Okay, so measures taken by the government to handle inflation. Okay, so we can suggest, or in the way forward, we can write these points, very important. So one is, government has reduced excise duty on fuels. This, they should have done it long back. No comments, but okay, so excise duty on fuels. Union and state governments across the states have reduced excise duties on petrol and diesel. This has reduced the fuel. Okay, and if you see the weightage also, so that is important. You can see here around 13.2. Okay, so that is important. So government decided, obviously a government has reduced this excise duty on fuel. And even customs duty was reduced for several items like cotton, etc., gemstones and certain critical chemicals. Okay, so this has also reduced the prices. So government's measures, these are all government measures. Okay, and then reduction in excise duty on fuel. So if we see in the chart, okay, so fuel prices coming down. Okay, so that is because of this particular aspect. Okay, so fuel prices, fuel and power, etc., we observe. Okay, so if you see fuel and power here, okay, so they have come down, talk about petrol and diesel, they have come down. Okay, so this is mainly because of government's measures. This is mainly because of government's measures. Okay, so here if you see 62.9 to 41.9. Okay, so this is because of the government measures that slowly WPI inflation has reduced. And what government has done, one is excise duty reduction, reduction of import duty, as well as the customs duty. Is this clear? Okay. Now, fuel price inflation, declining global crude oil prices. Okay. So, in 2022, what we observe is what are the reasons for this drop in the fuel prices? That is clearly explained in this table in the economic survey. So, here first is during COVID, basically, subdued global demand because of COVID. Because of COVID, demand has reduced. This is one important aspect. Okay. And here, another important aspect is cuts in crude supply by OPEC. Afterwards, in 2022, again, oil prices increased. Now, OPEC countries started reducing the supply, and that again has increased the prices in India as well. Okay, so then here if you observe June, basically supply disruptions and rising tensions in Europe. So oil prices started peaking up again. Okay, and then December, by December you observe that the price has reduced, and here reduction in VAT and central excise duty. Okay, this probably we should have done it a little earlier itself. Now everything is up and we find the inflation is high, and then you come up with a measure. Is this clear, everybody? Understood? Okay, so this is about the moderation of crude oil prices. Okay, nothing to worry much about this. Okay, so this graph shows about the reduction of the crude oil prices. So that is about the basic understanding of WPI. Again, we'll make a comparison. We'll compare WPI and CPI together. Okay, now this is retail inflation. So we use CPI combined for policy making. In fact, RBI uses CPI combined for its inflation targeting. So the CPI combined uses both CPI rural as well as CPI urban. Okay, and in WPI, what is going to happen? See, in WPI, how is WPI measured basically? Now WPI is there, you have a basket, and you have a basket of goods only here. And these goods are divided into primary, fuel, and you have manufacturing, isn't it? And you have some 697 items, 697 items which are there. And you take the base year of 2011-12. And now we arrive at a value of, let's say, 100 rupees. Okay. And now I want to measure these 697 items, okay, in 2022-23, 2022-23. Now this is something like, let's say, 114. It means inflation, WPI inflation rate is around how much? 14%. Are you able to get this? This is how the WPI inflation is calculated. And each good will not have the same weightage, obviously. The weightage will differ, as we have mentioned in the box. In the primary sector, the weightage is different. Manufacturing sector, the weightage is different. So that is one understanding which you should have. So this is how that it is measured. And when we talk about CPI, the base year is obviously, this 100 is basically 2012 is the base year for CPI, or the Consumer Price Index. Now, what are the categories? Okay, in the CPI, average annual retail inflation based on CPI combined. So this is the understanding here. Now, one is we have the food and the beverages. This is the first one. Okay, food and the beverages. In this, you have cereals, meat, egg, whatever it is. Okay, so then that is the first one. I think this is going away. Okay, and the second we have pan, tobacco, intoxicants. Okay, and third, clothing and footwear. Fourth, you have housing. Then you have fuel and light, and the miscellaneous. Total, how many are there? 6. When I'm talking about CPI, we have 6 items. This is what you should understand. If I go up, if I have to move up, this will go. I think you got my point, right? This slide is divided. I could not put it in one slide. Okay, this chart I couldn't put it in one slide. Okay, now if you observe this, okay, when I use the word headline, it means it includes all the 6. Headline means what? It includes all the 6. Everything is included. Okay. Now, when I use the word core inflation, core, here you have something like the core inflation. Core inflation. So this core inflation includes which one and which one then? Which will this be there? Yes. Okay. This will be there. Okay. Okay. And then housing. Yes. Okay. Will fuel and light be? No. Okay. And miscellaneous? Yes. Mainly services. Miscellaneous is basically mainly services, which is not there in the WPI. So housing related details, etc., all that will not be there in the WPI. So this miscellaneous services is here. Okay. So, what was the first one in the first slide? Food and beverages. Will that be there in the core? No. So core does not have 1. Okay. Core has 2, 3, 4, and this one. Okay. So that is what is core. And that weightage is how much here? 47.3. 47.3. Are you able to get this? The weightage of core is 47.3. Is that okay, everybody? Okay. And headline is everything together, everything put together, headline 100. Everything is put together, the weightage is 100. Okay, core, I've removed these and it is 47.3. Food inflation, this is, you have removed beverages, so 39.1. Okay, so if, now you have understood this, can I go to the above slide? Okay, so if I have to, here food and beverages is 45.9, major chunk is 45.9. In this, food is around 39. Okay, so that is what he is trying to measure. Okay, food is around 39. That is what he is trying to measure. You can see this weight here. Food inflation is how much? 39. Beverages included, it is 45. Is that clear, everybody? Okay. Now, let's try to understand some data here. Okay, here we observe that food and beverages, there is increase. Okay, shortage. Okay, cereals. See the cereals increase here, very high. Okay, and vegetables, if you see here, vegetables, especially the prices have increased because of tomatoes. Economic survey talks about tomato prices. Okay, so very high. Okay, so here you can observe vegetables prices increasing, etc. Okay, and milk and milk products, there is an increase. Okay, milk and milk product, economic survey says animal feed, etc. became costly. Animal feed, etc. became costly. All this was also responsible for dairy products prices to increase. Dairy product prices to increase. Okay, so here if you observe vegetables, tomatoes, etc. becoming costly, cereals not stable, shortages were there. Okay, and then milk and milk products, basically animal feed becoming costly, and because of all that, okay, CPI inflation, okay, has to increase. No, you can see here comparing 2020 to 23. Okay, so for 4.2 to 7%. Okay, so this is the understanding. Now let's see the second chart here. Okay, clothing and footwear. Clothing and footwear, there was, economic survey says there is some increase with respect to this clothing and footwear. Okay, so you can observe there. Okay, fuel and light. Okay, this was a reduction was there, and miscellaneous is basically services. So when we talk about the services, some services started becoming costly, and this services part is only covered in the CPI. Okay, for example, if you see, education service has increased. Education service has increased. Okay, so coaching schools, all that opened up. Okay, so they were trying to not okay, so this is basically, earlier it was online. Okay, so everybody was sitting at home. Now it is So all that is responsible. Now, if you observe health and all, health, there is a reduction. During COVID, health services are in demand. So COVID period, prices of health are higher. Now, there is a reduction with respect to health. Okay, so this is something very important aspect which you should observe. Housing also we find there is some increase. Is that clear? Okay. Now, headline inflation 5.5 to 6.8. There is an increase. That is the overall. Then core inflation weightage is 47.3. There was a slight increase. Okay. And food inflation, if you see 39.1 weightage, no beverages here. Okay. So 3.8 to 7. Food inflation is responsible for increase in CPI inflation. If you see, we'll solve some questions at the end. So food inflation was responsible for CPI inflation to increase. In this case, that is something which you should observe. Is this okay? Yes. Headline inflation declined from its peak. Okay, despite CPI inflation declining, inflation was seen because of these aspects. Survey says it was seen because of these aspects: oil and fat, fuel, okay, transport and communication. And again, supply side disruptions, these things became costly. Fertilizers, wheat, fuel and rare earth metals. Okay, you need not remember everything, but trends you can observe. Once the concept is clear, we can easily mark. By the end, we will solve some questions. You are able to mark the right answer means we are done. No means again. No means there's a problem again. We have to come back. Okay, so this is economic survey clearly mentions retail inflation is driven by food commodities. Mainly stems from agriculture and allied sector, housing, textiles and pharmaceutical. There's a specific focus on pharma as far as economic survey is concerned. Okay, now here you can see during financial year 23, food and beverages, clothing, footwear, fuel and light were the main major contributors to headline inflation. Okay, so this is food, clothing, footwear, fuel and light were the major contributors to headline inflation. This is the graph. Now here if you see, vegetable spike is mainly because of tomato, I mentioned this. Okay, and food inflation based on consumer price index peaked to 7%. And major price rise was mainly because of vegetables, cereals, I've shown you cereals there, okay, shortages, etc. And then milk also is because of animal feed becoming costly, and spices because of shortages. This is also shortages, cereals also shortages, vegetables basically tomato, supply side constraints, etc. And spices also there were shortages. RBI estimates increase in domestic prices for cereals and spices, supply shortages, and milk, high feed cost. UPSC will not ask milk why price increased because of high feed cost. No. This is for our understanding. Now, this is one more important factor. Okay, so here you will remember some facts. Rising edible oil prices, international price pressure directly affected the edible oil prices worldwide due to shortfall in production worldwide. So, if there is a question, edible oil prices started decreasing, that statement is going to be wrong. Okay, so this is something like an observation. If you say last 3 years, last 4 years, edible oil prices, he can give a statement. So edible oil prices, international price pressures directly affected the edible oil prices. Okay, why? Because worldwide there was a shortfall with respect to production. Okay, India meets 60% of its edible oil demand through imports. Last year economic survey in the agriculture chapter gives a graph also clearly showing that we import a lot of edible oil. Sunflower oil, which makes up 15% of our total oil imports, is procured mainly from Ukraine and Russia. Okay, so therefore, obviously, these are in trouble, means obviously sunflower oil prices are going to increase. This is one big challenge. Is this clear? Okay, so this is a graph which talks about the increase with respect to edible oils, the price increase with respect to edible oils. It clearly shows a peak. Now, when you're importing, for lesser quantity, you'll end up paying more. For lesser quantity, you'll end up paying more. Are you able to get this? Okay, because the prices are going to, prices have increased. Price increase, obviously, for lesser quantity also, you'll end up paying more. So the graph tends to, the value-wise, it is increasing. Is that clear? Yes. Okay. Is that okay? Now let's move forward. See, measures to contain inflation in essential food commodities. What did the government do to contain inflation with respect to essential food commodities? Here, if we see cereals, wheat flour exports were regulated. This is one important thing which government did. Exports on wheat restricted, wheat flour regulated. Along with maida and suji, the government also imposed an export duty of 20% on rice, brown rice, etc. And this has reduced some inflation, obviously, because you're stopping them to export. Okay, so this is one measure which buffer stock of pulses has been maintained. You're trying to maintain a buffer for pulses on one side, export duty on cereals on the other side, and basic duty on refined palm oil was reduced to curtail unfair practices. That means edible oil imports, import duties were also reduced. So one is reduction of edible oil, import duty on edible oil. Okay, cereals basically regulated, exports were regulated through duties, and pulses, buffer stocks were maintained. This is what the economic survey says. Buffer stock with respect to pulses, with respect to cereals, export duty, and with respect to edible oils, they have reduced the import duty. Measures, these are the measures taken. Okay. Done till there? Okay, so now the economic survey makes a comparison between rural, urban. Okay. Now what is the understanding is, basically during COVID period, urban inflation was more than rural inflation. During COVID period, urban inflation was more than rural inflation. But during 2022-23, okay, the data that is available, we find that the rural inflation in most of the states is greater than the urban inflation. Rural inflation is greater than the urban inflation. Now the reasons are because of multiple reasons. One of the important reason is the weightages assigned to rurals. When I talk about CPI rural and CPI urban, the weightages assigned will also vary. Okay, how is that weightage decided? For example, here if you observe food and beverages in the rural area, you have given a weightage of 54% around, and in urban areas, we have given 36.29. So the weightage of food is higher in rural area in comparison to the urban area. Similarly, if we talk about housing in rural area, rent and all, it is not that high. In fact, it is not required much. But when it comes to urban areas, think of Delhi, 21.67. That means this urban area housing has to play an important role. Are you able to get this? Similarly, when I talk about fuel and light, in rural areas, 7.94. More weightage is given with respect to fuel here in rural in comparison to urban. Now, what is the criteria for deciding these weightages? What do you think would have been the criteria for deciding these weightages? Is there any specific criteria? High demand. Okay. So simple logic is, out of the total proportion of your income, in rural areas, maximum percentage they spend on food. That is the reason weightage for food is at 54.18. But out of the total proportion, the percentage of their income which they spend on food is lower in the urban areas. Okay, if you know about Angel's law, okay, so the Angel's law says, as and when, see, it is not about the amount of money you are spending. It is about the proportion of income you are spending. There is a difference. No, it's not about the total amount of money you are spending. It is about the proportion of income you are spending. Proportion of income, I think you're getting my point. Suppose 100 rupees your income, you are spending more than 50% of your income. 50 rupees you are spending, okay, for food, etc. But when we talk about an urban area, probably, if you're getting some 100 rupees, you're maybe spending only 30 rupees on food or 25 rupees on food. Maybe you will spend on other things. Are you able to get this? So Angel's law, there's this law which says, as and when the incomes of a country are increasing, as and when incomes of a country are increasing, their proportionate spending on basic aspects. When you talk about roti, kapada and makan, their basic, the proportionate spending on basic aspects has to increase or decrease? Decrease. Their proportionate spending on basic aspects has to decrease. That means when my income is 10,000 rupees, I may spend 5,000 on food or basic necessities. But when that is 50%, that is 50%. But when my income becomes 1 lakh, probably I may spend only 30,000 or 25,000 on food. That means my proportionate spending on basic requirements is going to decrease when my income is going to increase. The same applies not just rural, urban, even the poor man and the rich man. The poor man is somebody who spends major chunk or major percentage of his income on food or the basic requirements. So this is one, that is the per capita consumption expenditure or the proportionate spending of his income will be the criteria for taking this rural as 54.18 and urban 36.29. And these weightages will definitely have a direct impact on which inflation is going to be higher. That means whether it is rural inflation which is going to be higher or whether it is urban inflation which is going to be higher. Are you able to get this? So during COVID pandemic, actually urban inflation was high. But afterwards, one more benefit was urban areas, there was more easy access to imported food slowly. After the COVID went off, okay, so urban areas, imported food was available easily. And because of that, in the urban areas, the inflation started reducing at a faster pace. When I talk about food inflation, though the weightage is there, food inflation 2022-23 started decreasing. But if we talk about the weightages is for rural is more, urban is less. So that means you may be thinking that the rural inflation should have reduced faster. But that's not the case. It's not the rural inflation that has reduced faster, but it is the urban inflation. So in rural inflation, in rural areas, the food related inflation has reduced on a slower pace in comparison to the urban areas. And one of the reason is obviously that imported food was easily available in urban areas, but imported food took some more time for availability in the rural areas. This was one reason. Okay, so this is something which we should understand. Okay, so inflation reduced due to fall of global food prices. Global food prices went down, and that is the reason both rural and urban inflation, both of them reduced. But which one reduced faster? Obviously, the urban inflation reduced faster, and in most of the states, your observation would be that the rural inflation is higher than the urban inflation for the year 2022-23. Is that clear, everybody? So one is the weightages, very important aspect here. And if you see here, housing 21.67. Housing is not, the weightage itself is not written there, 21.67 here. Fuel, more proportion. Fuel is more sensitive for the rural than urban. They have more income, you're spending, that's not an issue. Okay, so here what we should understand is, it is more sensitive, fuel and light more sensitive for the rural in comparison to urban. Okay, and when it comes to miscellaneous is basically services. Okay, most of the services, etc. Then you will find that the urban 29.53. So in the urban areas or in CPI inflation, if you see CPI urban, basically the inflation increase. If housing prices are going to increase, then automatically CPI urban also has to increase. Is this clear, everybody? Okay, so rural urban inflation gap has reduced in 2022-23. We'll see the graph. Rural urban inflation gap has reduced. This is one more understanding for the prelims. Rural urban inflation gap has reduced in the year 2022-23. Is this okay? Yes. spending percentage, basically sensitive that they are spending more per proportion of their income on fuel and light. No, demand, it's not about demand. No, it's about your proportion of your income you're spending. So that is the basic logic here. Demand may be more. So here this is not painful for them much in comparison to rural area. Price of electricity is low, but one thing is this weight is based on the proportion of spending. Proportion of spending of their income. Income to kam hai. Is that okay? If your income is only 50 rupees and you're spending 10 rupees out of it. Okay, if your income is 100 rupees, you're spending 10 rupees. Same. But the proportion, when your income is 50, then you're spending more proportion of your income on fuel and light. Is that okay? Yes. No, because here there's no much difference because I've already removed housing out here. I've removed housing out here. Housing is the major differentiating aspect. No, separately we have put housing. Housing is the major differentiating factor. Are you able to get this? See, not because of inflation. I'll say who is affected more because of food inflation. If our inflation is because of food, oil, food becoming costly, etc., then obviously the rural people should be affected more because they're spending more proportion of their income on food. And the weightage is more. Are you able to get this? Yes. Okay, so that is okay. So what he says is you're exporting from rural to urban area. So that is also one of the reasons. See, during lockdown period, the problem, first of all, food issues were there in rural. Then obviously food issue will be there in urban. First rural, then it is for urban. But urban imports came fast. Logistics, all that. Okay, but rural, it did not. It took some time. Is that okay? Yes. Domestic retail inflation table. Why is it used? Tobacco reduced. I did not observe tobacco. I observed food. I did not observe tobacco. I tell it's a minor. Where is it? Okay. Clothing and food. Okay, this one. Pan, tobacco. Wait. Everybody, see, there are so many things here out. Okay, and your specific reason, I don't know. I have to check. I'll check and get back. See, pan, tobacco, and intoxicants, basically, why it reduced? Okay, so is it something related to demand, etc.? Not related to tax, obviously. Not related to tax. Government reduced taxes on other things, but not on tobacco. That is for sure. Okay, but why exactly? I'll get back. Why? Wait. One question and you are somewhere. Okay, come back now. So this is, see this. Here, the rural-urban inflation differential has decreased. Now here, if you observe, this is rural-urban, I think this will not happen. So this is March 2022. We'll observe that there is this gap between rural-urban inflation is peak. headline. Is that okay? It has the gap between rural, urban inflation. The dotted one is the rural. Okay, urban. This dotted one is the rural one. The gap between rural urban inflation peaked in March 2022. This is one observation here, March 2022. And then over a period of time, there was a convergence. Convergence is, you will find there is less difference between the rural and urban inflation. Is that clear, everybody? Okay, so this is one observation. When it comes to food inflation also, the gap was highest in March. March, the gap between rural and urban inflation. So higher rural inflation than urban inflation was to be seen. Okay, so higher rural than urban in most of the states. This is what we have seen, higher rural than urban. This is what the dotted line, higher rural, and the gap between the rural and urban has peaked in March 2022, and then it has converged almost by December 2022. Almost converged by December 2022. This is repeat. Urban inflation is decreasing rapidly. You see both urban and rural decreasing here. When both are decreasing together, here if you see, the gap is less, no? After 1 year, what is the situation? I'm not talking about it. Okay, now the question is, by December 2022, both are going down, no? Both are going together. Both. See, converging is, the converging in the sense it is the gap has reduced. Okay, it's not that both are equal. Rural, you find rural more than urban in most of the states. That is clearly visible. So if you take the graph, it is little different here. During COVID situation, you will observe here the red line is above the dotted line. So that means here during this point of time, if you observe, during this point of time, you observe that the urban inflation was more than rural inflation. That is what I was saying. During COVID, urban inflation was more than rural. Okay. And then 2022-23, you will find most of the states, rural is more than urban. And the gap between rural and urban was at its peak during the March 2022, which has reduced by December 2022. This is what the graph is saying. Is that okay? Yes. Now if you observe food inflation, if during that point of time, if you observe, it is basically the urban more than rural here. Are you able to get this? Now red one is above. Okay. And then you will observe by March 22, the rural has picked up and urban slowly is able to settle down faster. Okay. This is because of imported food availability, etc. And also because of the weightages assigned to the food. Weightage assigned to the food is also a factor. Okay. So, and also the availability of food, availability of imported food. Gap is there. Gap is there, but the gap is less, no? The gap is less. And now here, if you observe, this is going down further at a faster pace. This is food. Then the gap will increase. That nobody will ask because you don't know. Is that okay? Just because food is produced by farmer, it is not that farmer or people are getting food at lesser price. That is one more observation. No, just because you're producing does not mean that the consumer in the rural area is getting it at that price, lesser price. No, that is not there. Okay, and here two things, weightage also, 54% is the weightage. No, so weightage you are putting means if food inflation increases a little, the impact will be more on rural than urban. Okay, so is that okay? See here, rural fuel inflation remained lower than its urban counterparts due to subdued prices on traditional fuels. Okay, other things other than the petrol, diesel, etc. Gap between the rural and urban inflation reached its widest in March 2022. Same thing. Okay, and the current fiscal year saw rural and urban inflation closely tracking each other. That's all. Done. Yes. Now this is important. Now this is about the CPI and WPI gap. Okay, so one is rural-urban gap, another one is the CPI and the WPI gap. So if I have to analyze WPI and CPI, first of all, we should also know the weightages. This is the weightage of WPI and this is the weightages of the CPI. Okay, now this is clear. Primary 22.6, fuel 13.2, manufacturing 64.2. Now here if you observe CPI, food and beverages is the highest, 45.86. Around 39% is food, rest is beverages. And then here if you observe clothing and footwear 6.53. Housing services areas, basically services are not part of WPI. Services are not part of WPI, but services here, that means if services are increasing, these services which have increased has led to increase in CPI. Services started becoming costly. Okay, suppose education is becoming costly. Okay, after COVID pandemic. Okay, so that is what the chart was saying. So that is also responsible for increase in CPI. Are you able to get this? Okay, so these weightages. So why in the recent past there is a convergence between, or what is the reason for the gap or difference between CPI and WPI inflation, if there is a question. So first understanding is the impact would be different on both of them because of these weightages. First thing, because of these weightages. In CPI, one more important aspect is services are part of it, and we observe after COVID that the services cost started increasing. Services started increasing, and that was also responsible for the CPI to increase. Is that okay? Yes. Now here, if we make an observation here, okay. So November 2021, we observe that this is WPI. Okay, this is WPI, and this is CPI. Okay, so there was November 2021, the gap is max. The gap between WPI and CPI is max. The gap between WPI and CPI is max. Okay, and then what we observe is over a period of time, there is also increase with respect to CPI. You observe March 2022, April 2022. Okay, and here the observation again, June 2022 also, the gap is max. The gaps between WPI and CPI. And after that, you observe that there is a convergence between WPI and CPI. So by November 2022 and December 2022, we can see there is a convergence, almost convergence between WPI and CPI. So one reason is this increase in CPI is also because of increase in services costs. Second important aspect is lagged effect, which we were talking about. So once WPI is affected, then CPI will take some more time to get affected. And that is the reason what we observe is, though WPI is increasing, you will not find the impact immediately on the CPI. Okay, and later you will find an impact on CPI. So this is called as the lagged effect. So another one is services especially becoming costly. Okay, and another one is this. And then government has taken some measures, and that is the reason WPI started going down. Reduction with respect to excise duties, customs duties, all that. Okay, so food prices coming down. So subsequently, we find that the WPI is also dropping and CPI is increased here. Okay, and you find that they are converging by the time of December 2022. This graph should be clear. We'll see if there is a question also on this. Suppose if I have to talk about CPI core and CPI food, what has happened from 2022 to 2021 to 2022, and then from 2022 to 2023. Okay, CPI core inflation increased or decreased? Decreased. CPI inflation decreased, no? Yes? Okay, and what about CPI headline? CPI headline also has decreased. CPI headline also has decreased. Are you able to get this? Okay, so This is about the convergence in core inflation, CPI as well as WPI. And you know what is core inflation. No. Why a gap between CPI and WPI? Now, once we have understood that, one is the international prices to wholesale prices is relatively quick. It impacts retail prices with a lag. Got the point, right? Impacts WPI first, and then after a certain period of time, it will affect the retail prices. Second, due to the difference in composition and weights assigned to different commodities in the two indices. This is one more. Both the statements are right. Are you able to get this? So, difference in composition and weights which you have seen. Now, this is the divergence phase. WPI and CPI combined started diverging in March 2021. Remember, we have seen the graph, maximum divergence. As WPI inflation touched double digits due to unfavorable base effects. One is base effect. Of course, base effect is a comparative effect. But along with that, the oil prices, iron, steel, these things became costly, affecting the WPI prices. Okay, affecting the wholesale prices. And while CPI combined inflation remained stable, and the difference between the two reached a peak of 10% in again November 2021. And then by December 2022, it has reduced. This is what the graph is saying. Okay, and then convergence phase. Convergence basically here, if you see convergence between WPI and CPI was mainly driven by two factors. A cooling in inflation of commodities such as crude oil, iron, aluminium and cotton led to lower WPI. So imported inflation reduced. So because of this cooling period of inflation, crude oil, iron, etc., WPI started going down. But inflation in services sector, which is a core component of CPI, okay, so miscellaneous area, okay, this which is not included. So this was increasing in the services. This is inflation is increasing in the services. This was increasing the CPI, and these were reducing in the WPI, and therefore WPI was coming down, and therefore there was convergence. This is what the economic survey says. Is that okay? Yes. Now, another important aspect is economic survey talks about inflationary expectations. Lag effect, see, the product is going into the wholesale market. No, logistics is one aspect. Obviously, logistics is one aspect. See, what is, suppose in a wholesale mandi you're buying something, wholesale mandi. Okay, so you're talking about any agriculture related area, or this is basically, I call it as, let's say, WPI related aspect. Okay, but the product when it comes to the final consumer, okay, so let's take it as the CPI part. Okay, so that means there is a lag, prices have increased. Okay, there is a lag for that to get reflected. Second is, if I say iron and raw materials, you're talking about in the manufacturing part of WPI. These are used for manufacturing, and if these iron and raw materials, these kind of things become costly, then the final product, let's say the car or some other product, the final product is becoming costly. Okay, so that means there is a lag effect till the time the product comes into the market and the consumer buys. So this is what is the lag effect. Is that okay? Delay, see, it can be 2-3 months, or during COVID it can be higher. Okay, so but there is a lag effect, definitely. Suppose oil prices are increasing. Now all the companies which are using oil as raw material, let's say, okay, their cost of production is going to increase. If the cost of production is going to increase, the final product cost is going to increase. And the final consumer, when he's paying the price, the product cost is going to pay it at a higher level. Yes. See, instantly is when it is entering into the market, yes. So otherwise, if there is a lag lag need not be only with respect to the final product. That is one aspect, one example which I was talking about. See, the wholesale market is getting affected, then the retail market, by the time it comes to the retail market, okay, it takes some time. That period of lag is there. Take it that way. Okay, now here, economic survey is talking about inflationary expectations. Inflationary expectation. What is this inflationary expectation? When there is inflation is increasing. Okay, inflation is increased. Now the expectation is people believe that this inflation is high, and if people believe that because of this increased inflation, I want more salaries, more wages, more salary. I have to sustain. So people observe, people can be business also, business houses also. There is business expectations on one side, public expectation on the other side. Okay, so business expectations also, they also observe that inflation is increasing, and if they feel because of the war that inflation is not going to get controlled in the long term, if they believe that inflation is not going to get controlled in the long term, that means they do not have trust on the institutions like RBI or government that they will be capable enough to reduce the inflation. So inflation expectations that time will be higher for a very long period. Are you able to get my point? See, if inflation expectation is high, automatically inflation will also increase. If inflation expectation is high, automatically inflation will also increase. That means when asking for higher wages, okay, so the business house feels that there will be higher inflation in the market, why to produce or whatever it is. So inflation expectations will over a period of time drive inflation. So in the short term, for example, if in the long term also if they believe Ukraine war impact on inflation, government will fail to control. Or in the long term, they believe that RBI's monetary policy of increasing 250 basis points from 4 to 6.5 will not be in a position to reduce inflation, and it is beyond RBI or government's control. Suppose the public or the business houses believe in that manner, then automatically the inflation expectations will be on a higher side. If inflation expectations are on a higher side, then automatically inflation is also going to increase. If there is more trust on the institutions like RBI or government, obviously then people believe that no, our institutions will get it down, get it under control. Okay, and RBI through its monetary policy, etc., they were able to control the inflation. Okay, they have got it down to almost 5.6, 5.7, okay, below 6% by December. So this clearly shows that the inflationary people had some trust, business houses had some trust with respect to inflation, that these institutions will be able to reduce the inflation. So here if you see, inflationary expectations are decisive in charting the course of inflation regulation. Okay, so they will decide whether inflation is going to increase or inflation is going to decrease. If inflationary expectations are high, people don't believe in institutions, then automatically inflation will increase. Inflation will increase. This is what this particular topic talks about. So there are two words which are used. One is anchoring. So anchoring means basically they believe that inflation is going to decrease. So RBI will be capable of reducing the inflation in the long term. So this is what is called as anchoring. Or if I say de-anchoring, de-anchoring means something like you don't believe that the institutions will be able to reduce the inflation in the long term period. Are you able to get these two words here? So RBI will successfully anchor inflation and reduce inflation, if not in the short term, at least in the long term. Then inflationary expectations will not be high. Now de-anchoring means you do not have trust in the institutions. So in the long term also you believe that the Ukraine war, inflation or RBI's policies will not be in a position to handle inflation. Then you will not be in a position to reduce inflation. That is called as de-anchored or de-anchoring. Are you able to get this? Okay. Now if it is anchored properly, then it is okay. That means inflation expectations will not be high. If it is not anchored or if it is de-anchored, then inflation expectations will be on a higher level. Are you able to get this? Inflation expectations will be on a higher level, which will again drive inflation, Now, whenever they take some policies, for example, here, tightening of repo rate, CRR, reducing government purchases of inflationary expectations, and helping guide trajectory of inflation. So here, basically, RBI policy of anchoring, tightening of the repo rate, CRR, all that it has done. So this is the tightening policies which RBI has done. But if people don't believe in RBI, then it will not be anchored properly. There will be de-anchoring. Expectations high, inflation will be high. So this is what economic survey says. Business and household inflationary expectations are also falling. So here we will find there are two graphs. I have not put those graphs. You will find that the business houses expectations, inflation expectations are also falling. And even the common man, the public also, the inflation expectations are falling. That means both business houses and people have trust on the institutions, and therefore we can say our inflation is anchored. Are you able to get this? Okay. And when you are coming up with such policies, when we are coming up with such policies like monetary policy measures of price stability. Reserve Bank's monetary, it has increased the repo rate from 4 to 6.5. Now, these are called as tightening policies. These are called as tightening policies. And economic survey talks about inflation situation in 1970s and today, 1970s, okay, or 1974. It gives examples in US 1990 and today's situation. And it makes a comparison of difference in inflation, how it is. And it talks about inflationary expectations also. So inflationary expectations, when we are talking about, okay, de-anchored means they do not have trust. They do not have trust. So if they do not have trust, and still if you are increasing the interest rates, for example here, now 4%, then increase from 4 to 4.4, then 4.9, then 5.4, 5.9, 6.25, and then later to 6.5. This is what they did now, 4 to 6 point. So repo rate. So in countries to tackle inflation, when the respective federal banks have increased interest rates, respective federal banks have increased interest rates as federal tightening, monetary tightening, as we have discussed. So on one side, if people have more trust, if the trust is there, then there will be a proper soft landing. But during that point of time, what they observed is there was something like a hard landing, because people, inflationary expectations were on a higher side. They did not believe in the institutions. They did not believe that the oil, because oil was a major factor that was responsible for increase in inflation during that point of time. Currently, oil is one of the factor that is responsible for inflation presently. So there is food related areas, other related areas that are responsible for inflation today. But 1970, during that point of time in 70s, one of the major factor, in fact, one and only factor, was the oil which is responsible for increase in inflation. And obviously to reduce inflation, when you're coming up with the tightening policies as you have done here, okay, so, or in 2008 during subprime crisis in US, okay, then they first pushed money into the US economy, and then subsequently you went ahead with federal tightening, etc. You call it as taper, federal tapering. Okay, so you're removing liquidity from the market. Are you able to get this? Okay, the federal, that is basically US has done. So it's not the first time, no, it's not the first time. But when you do that, if it is leading to recession, if you do that and if it leads to recession, okay, if you are tightening the policy, reducing liquidity, why it leads to recession? When you tighten the policy, what is going to decrease? Investment is going to decrease. When you tighten, loans are not available, investment is going to decrease. When investment is going to decrease, then it may lead to recession. If it is not leading to recession, it is dependent on two factors. One, inflationary expectations, people believe in institutions. Okay, then there can be soft landing. When I say soft landing, India's case, they are more focused on soft landing. Soft landing means, though you are tightening the policy, like this, it will not lead to recession. It will not lead to recession. Here, it may lead to recession. If it is leading to recession, it is a hard landing. Your tightening policies have led to hard landing. You are not so successful. Inflation is there. You have to control inflation. Interest rates were increased, or you have reduced the money supply. So investment obviously will decrease. But how you land up at the end of the day? So you're landing up hard means, because of your tightening policies, it has led to recession. Your tightening policies have not led to recession. Subsequently, you were able to recover and growth was there. That is basically hard landing. This is what the economic survey says. Expectations. Is this clear, everybody? Yes. So here, this is what we have discussed already. Reserve Bank Monetary Policy Committee increased the policy repo rate by 250 basis points, and this, what will it do? Okay. Now here, this is one more aspect. Difference between current inflation and inflation in 1970s. 70s, 70s, 74, even 1990 as well. Okay, so here, current global scenario and inflation is similar to experience of 1970s, particularly the aftermath of the oil crisis, but the environment and intensity differ in various aspects. So environment and intensity. So if you see advanced economies, I showed you the table, and 7.2 advanced economy, one of the highest after 1980s. Starting graph. Okay, so here if you see, current inflation, rise in oil prices, it was there, no doubt, small rise. But here oil prices rose to historic heights. This was the main reason for inflation. Okay, and this price rise during that point of time is confined to oil purely. Here it is agriculture, fertilizer, metals, it is a basket, it is complete. Okay, and then supply chain disruption, small role in the recent price increase. Supply chain played a role, no doubt about it, during Ukraine war, obviously, but played huge part in increasing prices. Complete, oil, stuck. Okay, rise in inflation was followed by several years of low inflation. Okay, current inflation increased then again by December 2022, you find that there is a fall. But 1970s crisis took place against the backdrop of steadily rising world inflation. Steadily rising world inflation. So this is a risky area, and there was more of hard landing rather than soft landing. Here the expectation, obviously there will be soft landing, at least for India. In US, suppose we'll take the case that US is not revealing that it is in recession. Okay, US generally never reveals unless it is like deep and it is dying, then you'll say, oh, recession. Negative growth rate. For never it reveals. Generally 2008 also, that is the case. Okay. There are some questions given. On this also, I think, in our material. Okay. You're tired? No. I should be. Today we'll not have break. We'll finish off this. That's all. No 3 hours class today. Okay, so no break. No break. Okay. See here. Now 2 sectors were specifically focused. One is the housing sector and another one is the pharma. 2 sectors were focused in the economic survey. So here, housing prices provide information on the state of the economy via booms and busts in asset markets, basically. And there are 2 indices here. Okay, so this is given by the National Housing Bank, which publishes 2 housing price indices. Okay, one is at the assessment price, another one is at the market price. 2 indices. Okay, that means they go do some survey. They do some survey, obviously, and they will find out. They find out whether housing prices are increasing, decreasing, what it is. So they go and inquire. Okay, so here one is the market price index, and another one is the assessment price index. Assessment. So assessment price here, if you see, market price is basically price at which the property would sell for in the open market. Okay, so this is basically you go and ask the builders, you go and ask the developers, you go and ask what is your opinion on the prices. Okay, so they give the data. So this is basically price of the property would sell for in the open market, or you basically collect that data from the builders. Okay, then assessment price is basically value assigned to a home or other piece of real estate for property tax purpose. It takes into account the value of comparable properties in an area. Generally, this you will compare you will take it from the financial institutions or the lenders. You go and ask the banks and other institutions. They give this assessed price. And the builders, they basically give the market price, basically. Okay, so here these 2 indices, in the market price also, if you see, out of 50 cities, 43 cities saw an increase, and only 7 cities were mentioning about decline. And then assessment price, out of 50 cities, 46 again increase and 4 experienced a decline. So both at assessment price as well as the market price, we observed that there was an increase. So economic survey talks about 2 things here. One is it indicates a positive aspect. What is the positive aspect here? The positive aspect is there is demand. Demand is improving. There is demand is improving. But on the other side, government has also put in a lot of measures to make houses cheap. Government has put in taken a lot of measures to make houses cheap. Okay, so that is what is the observation here. Now this index, which is calculated by National Housing Bank, the base year that is taken is 2018. Base year that is taken is 2018. That is something which you will remember. So this is a graph which shows both the assessment prices, which you are collecting mainly from the financial institutions, etc., the lenders, etc., and the market prices both. And you find that there is a increase in most of the cities. This is what it says. Okay. Then pharmaceuticals is one more area. And here 2 things is, one is Jan Aushadhi Kendras. This is one area the economic survey talks about. Okay, so this Jan Aushadhi Kendras were also responsible for creating employment. Okay, and when we talk about drugs, so basically one is the patented drug. So patented drugs are always very costly, no doubt about it, because you would have read about the TRIPS agreement under WTO, etc. Okay, so patented drugs are very costly. But another one is the non-patented drugs. After the patent is over, now these generic drugs should be easily available at lesser prices for the common man, as simple as that. Okay, so here, one important aspect what we should observe here is the regulation part. National Pharmaceutical Pricing Policy 2012, administered by the Department of Pharmaceutical, lays the basic principle of regulation of prices of drugs in the market. Okay, so basic principles, because some essential drugs which are required, the prices should not go beyond a particular limit. Okay, that is the logic basically. So this is basically about the price ceiling and fixed prices. So National Pharmaceutical Pricing Policy administers the ceiling prices of almost so many formulations under the essential medicines, NLEMs. So these essential medicines, at what price they have to be sold. Okay, so this has to be decided. Okay, beyond a particular limit, the prices should not increase. Okay, and in addition to these formulations, the retail prices of these formulations have been fixed under the Drug Prices Control Order 2013. So which drug would be at which rate, etc. All that will be decided as per this. Pradhan Mantri Bharatiya Jan Aushadhi and Jan Aushadhi Kendras ensures quality generic medicine available at affordable prices. Here one is medicine on one side, quality medicines, and employment generation through these Jan Aushadhi Kendras. So economic survey talks about employment as well as easy availability of essential drugs. Okay, so that is the most important aspect. More than 9,000 Jan Aushadhi Kendras have been opened in 1,759 medicines and 280 surgical devices not required. Is this clear? Okay, so I'll give you a break after 10 minutes, 5 minutes, after 5 minutes. Let me, conclusion again, I have to start from beginning. So therefore, let me conclude, and then you can take from 5-10 minutes break. Those who want to go, they can go. Okay, so because conclusion is over, and then some questions we will solve. Okay, so here see, consumer price inflation went through 3 phases. Now you know everything. Of course, this is the first part in the economic survey. The first part, introduction you call, no? Actually, that is the conclusion. Okay, so one is the rising phase in 2022. Observe 7.8%. Okay, then the holding phase, August. And then the declining phase, good monsoon, government measures, what measures you know now. Okay, so almost brought it down to 5.7. Okay, so this is 3 phases you can see, declining phase. Next is the gap between high WPI and the lower CPI widened in May 2022 due to these reasons. What are the reasons? Differences in relative weights, now it should be clear, and lagged effect of imported input costs on the retail prices. These are the reasons. However, the gap between the 2 measures of inflation has reduced since then, demonstrating a tendency towards convergence. This should be clear. The graphs are clear, so this line should be clear. Rising HPI published by National Housing Bank, what is the base year it takes? Indicates the revival in the housing finance sector. Okay, so revival, why revival? Basically, the logic is people are ready to buy. Okay, so there is more increase in prices, etc. Demand is there. RBI's monetary policy, repo rate 250 basis points, etc. That we know already, we have discussed. Central government has taken certain fiscal measures to tackle inflation. These are the crux, basically. Export duty reduction, okay, and reduction in import duties, rationalization of tariff and imposition of stock limits on edible oils and oil seeds. There should not be hoarding, etc. Maintenance of buffer stock for onion, pulses, etc. Buffer stock. Okay, so this is all rationalization of import duty on raw materials used in manufacturing. If it comes up, measures taken by government, 1, 2, 3, 4, probably it is easy to answer. Okay, and climate across the world has become erratic, further strengthening upside risks to food prices. Food prices across the globe have increased, and in general, the year 2022 was marked by a return of high inflation in the advanced world after 3 to 4 decades. This I mentioned in the graph, the second graph which we have seen. The year 2022 has marked the return of high inflation in the advanced world. Okay, so that's 7.2. Overshoot of inflation above the upper end of the target range in India was one of the lowest in the world. I mentioned this. That upper limit of India is quite decent. We can manage it. Is that okay? Yes. And this is from our material. Okay, so what does the budget say? And yesterday I mentioned something. You can just go through this. Okay. Now you take a 10-minute break. Okay. Let's finish off this. With reference to domestic retail inflation, consider the following statements. What should be the answer for this question? Both the statements are okay? Yes. So headline inflation declined from December 2022, and then retail inflation was mainly driven by higher food inflation. Very simple once the survey is clear. The convergence between the WPI indices was seen in November after the gap of 21 months. In this context, which of the following are the driving factors? An increase in inflation of commodities such as crude oil, iron, aluminum, and cotton led to a lower WPI. Is it? No. The word itself is increase is saying and lower is saying. Okay, so there is no logic only there. Is that okay? And CPI inflation decreased due to a decrease in the prices of services. Increased, no? Services increased and therefore convergence. Okay, so probably this should be the answer. Yes. Now see the third one. I think you should be giving the right answer. It's an easy question. The recent oil prices are proportionally smaller than, okay, and the recent crisis has seen price increase across a broader range of commodities, whereas 1970s was confined to oil prices only, very clearly given. Okay, and the commodity supply disruptions have played a small role in the recent price than in the 1970s. A table, if it is clear, then the answer obviously should be 1, 2, and 3. Okay, then go to the fourth question. What should be the answer for this question? Which one should be eliminated? What is the base year? Is that okay? Okay, so, and it is calculated only for metropolitan cities, yes, across India, using the population of the cities as weights. This is one thing which you should remember. A point to be remembered. And this is anyhow you know. Then, according to economic survey, consider the following statements regarding the causes of rise in CPI. If that table which I have explained, the box and the numbers, so if you can understand, shortfall in crop harvest due to excessive heat in some part, yes. Is that okay? Yes. Owing to supply shortages, This is true. The second statement is okay. RBI forecasts elevated domestic prices for cereals and spices. And we said it is because of the shortages. Milk, it is because of the animal feed. Remember, tomatoes and all, it is because of supplies wastages. Are you able to get this? Okay, so, but RBI's monetary policy increased the policy rate under the liquidity to 50 basis points. Actually, it is, okay, this is, I don't know what I've written, should be 6.5. Okay, so 250 means it should be 6.5, no? Okay, so then it is all fine. Is that okay? What? No. Feb 20, no. It is basically Feb 2020, the 6.5 that was done, no? Check that Feb 6.5 when it was done. So what is the problem here? Monetary Policy Committee liquidity between May to Feb. True, 6.5. 250 basis points. What is the problem? It is almost 250 basis points. Okay, till Feb 2023. No problem there. Okay. December it is 6.25. Okay. Feb it is 6.5. Okay, but I think I don't know what this is this should be 6.5. That is the thing. Okay, 4 to 250 that. Witness lower CPI combined based as compared to 2021. During this year, some subgroups such as oil, fuel and transport reported high inflation. What should be the answer for this question? Second statement is okay? Yes. And first statement, witnessed the lower inflation, retail inflation as compared to 2021. Is it right or wrong? Check. Check and tell me. 2022 witnessed lower CPI combined base retail inflation as compared to 2021. Here 5.7 it has come down, no? 5.7, 7.8, 7, then 5.7. Is that okay? Huh? Is it clear? Okay, so if you see witness lower CPI combined, no problem, no? What is the problem there? If you see 2021, we said that was a high year where it was 7.8, then there was a period when it came down, and then to 5 point, yes, is that okay? So it has reduced, no? What is the problem? Okay, but during this, some subgroups such as oil, transport, communication reported high inflation. What about this? Yes, okay. According to economic survey, consider the following statements. March 2021, widened. So the wedge between inflation continued to widen before reaching its peak. This is also true. Okay, they will not ask like this. This is too much. Okay, since we have done the graph now, you can answer. In UPSC, they will not ask this, but it is only for understanding. But you'll at least know in the 2021, the gap was high, and by the time of 2022, the gap has reduced. That much should be clear, that's all. And the gap began to narrow until April 2022. Yes, that's true. Okay, so is this clear? So here, widen reaching its peak 10%, so the answer should be, okay, done. Last 5 minutes. Means you can look into it later. How UPSC was asking some questions with respect to inflation, quite easy questions only. This is about how UPSC was asking. This is just to get an idea, that's all. And I think many of you would have already solved these questions, the same topic. So with reference to inflation in India, which of the following statements is correct? Okay, so this is a very easy question. Is that okay? There is no explanation needed for this. Okay, consider the following statements. Yesterday we have discussed this. Yesterday's class we have talked about this, lender, bondholder. Okay, so So the bond holder will not benefit. Yesterday we have talked about it. Bond holder will not benefit. Yes. What about the third question? Okay, increase in money supply, demand pull inflation, increase in aggregate level of output, decrease in level of output, supply side, increase in demand. Yes, all the three will increase inflation. Basic concept. Okay, so there's no much of a tension here. Now see this, which of the following is likely to be most inflationary in its effect? See, this is a most dangerous form. Okay, if you are bridging your deficits by minting money, it will be inflation. So deficit financing through this method, deficit financing, if we are doing it through this method, it is going to be inflationary. So this deficit financing, if you are doing it through this method, it will increase inflation. Yes. It will create problems with rupee value fall over a period of time. Yes. It will also increase something called as your bond yields. Yesterday we discussed this. Yes. Which of the following measures would result in increase in money supply? Should result in increase in money supply. Purchase of government securities from public by the central bank, deposit of currency in commercial banks by the public, borrowing by the government from the central bank, sale of government securities to the public by the central government. See, first of all, increase in money supply, result in increase in money supply, sale of government securities to public by central bank means money is taken away. Money is taken away from the market. So money supply should decrease. Money supply should decrease. So obviously this should not be there. This also should not be there. Yes or no? Okay, so the only option. Is that okay? Yes. India has experienced persistent and high food inflation. This question is valid that time. Now you can't take this question. This is a previous UPSC question. Now you will not take. Due to gradual switch over to cultivation, the area under the cultivation of food grains has steadily decreased in the last 5 years, about 30. This is based on that years. Okay, so this you can leave. Now, a rapid increase in rate of inflation is sometimes attributed to base effect. What is base effect? It is the impact of the price levels of the previous year. We have seen that base effect here as well. So this was also a previous question. Okay. Is that okay? Yes. Next question is easy only. They will not ask again. Okay, so economic growth is usually coupled with inflation. That's it. The topic is over. Tomorrow there's inflation, infrastructure. Thank you.